I've always had this lingering feeling that Margaret, my mother-in-law, simply didn't like me. You know when someone smiles just enough to be polite but never enough to be genuine? That was her. For years, I told myself it didn't matter, that some women were born warm and others were born refrigerated. But then, out of nowhere, she started inviting me over every Thursday after work, just the two of us. And suddenly, I didn't know what to make of her. The first time she asked, I was so stunned I'm pretty sure my eyebrows touched my hairline. Margaret never sought me out, so hearing her say, "Come over on Thursdays, darling. We should get closer," felt like stepping into an alternate universe. I said yes because honestly, who refuses a peace offering? And a part of me, maybe the naive part, wondered if she genuinely wanted a relationship with me. I wanted to believe that. Over the next few weeks, something strange happened. I started to soften. Her tea tasted like memories I wanted to keep, and her small talk didn't feel like small talk anymore. She asked about my job, my mother, my childhood, like she actually cared. And for the first time since marrying Eric, I felt like I belonged in that family. Still, every time I drove home afterward, a little voice whispered that something about her sudden affection didn't sit right. And I tried so hard to ignore it, not knowing how much that voice already knew. Every Thursday became a ritual I didn't know I needed. I'd arrive tired from work, and she'd already have the kettle whistling like it had been waiting just for me. She'd insist I sit, relax, breathe. And honestly, as someone constantly juggling deadlines, errands, and the emotional maintenance of a marriage, that small act felt like a gift. It was unsettling how quickly comfort crept in. I caught myself looking forward to it more than I wanted to admit. She started sharing stories from her past, too, pieces of her life Eric never mentioned, moments of joy, moments of pain, even moments where she said she felt invisible in her own home. And sitting there, hearing her voice tremble at certain memories, I felt a tug in my chest. I saw a different version of her, one Eric never bothered to show me. Maybe that's why I opened up in return. It felt safe. It felt mutual. It felt overdue. Still, even in those warm moments, there was always something slightly off, like a puzzle piece that refused to click into place. Sometimes she'd ask oddly specific questions about my work schedule. Other times she'd check the clock a bit too often, like she was keeping track of something I wasn't aware of. I brushed it off as habit. Older people loved routines. But deep down, a small shiver would run through me, hinting that maybe this wasn't just about bonding. Maybe something else was quietly taking shape beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to show itself. One thing I kept noticing, no matter how much tea we drank or how many stories we shared, was that Margaret never mentioned Eric. Not once. It was almost comical, honestly. She could talk for hours about her garden, her neighbors, her late husband, but her only son? Silence. At first, I thought it was just her way of letting me be the star for once. But then I started wondering if avoiding his name was intentional. And that thought settled on me like a cold draft under a locked door. There were Thursdays when she seemed nervous, even if she tried to hide it with a tight smile. Her hands would tremble when she poured tea. She'd ask the same question twice. She'd glance toward her phone as if expecting a message. And every time I asked if everything was all right, she'd wave it off with a soft, "Oh, darling, don't fuss." But something about the way she said it felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced brushing me away before I arrived. It made the air around us feel heavier, like something unsaid kept hovering. Still, a strange part of me clung to the idea that maybe, just maybe, I was finally being accepted, that after years of cold stares and stiff hugs, she had chosen to open her world to me. And I wanted that so badly it was easy to overlook the small details that didn't add up. Details that later would feel painfully obvious. But back then, I was just grateful for the company, completely unaware that these Thursdays were never about bonding, and that a single missed visit would pull the curtain back on everything I wasn't supposed to see. That Thursday started like any other, until it didn't. I remember sitting at my desk, trying to finish a report, when a wave of nausea hit me so hard, I had to grip the edge of the table. It felt like the room tilted for a second, like my body knew something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. I texted Margaret, apologizing for canceling, and even added a heart at the end. Funny how we try to soften things for people who would never do the same for us. She replied instantly, almost too instantly, telling me to rest. Driving home felt like pushing through fog, both outside and inside my head. My stomach twisted, my temples throbbed, and all I wanted was silence and my couch. I remember thinking I'd take a long shower, curl into a blanket, maybe even binge something stupid on TV. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual. And yet, as I got closer to my house, this tiny prickle crept up my spine, like someone lightly dragging a fingernail along my nerves. I shook it off, blaming the nausea. I had no idea what I was about to walk into. When I opened the door, the first thing I heard wasn't silence. It was laughter. High, bright, flirty. The kind of laugh a woman makes when she feels desired. For a moment I froze, thinking maybe I misheard, maybe the TV was on, maybe Eric had a friend over. But then I heard his voice. Soft, playful, intimate. A tone he hadn't used with me in months. My heart stuttered, slamming hard against my ribs, and my breath hitched in my throat. Instinct pushed me forward, step by step toward the kitchen, carrying me straight into the truth I never asked for. I stepped into the hallway as quietly as I could, even though my pulse was pounding so loudly it felt like it echoed through the walls. And then I saw her. A woman I'd never met, sitting half naked on my kitchen counter like she belonged there. Legs crossed, hair tousled, wearing nothing but confidence and my husband's attention. And Eric, my Eric, was standing between her knees, smiling as he made coffee, like this was their morning ritual. The world around me seemed to shrink, the air turning thin as paper. It's strange what the body does in moments like that. You expect to crumble or scream or make everything in the room explode with the weight of your hurt. But I didn't do any of that. Instead, I felt myself go eerily still, like I'd stepped out of my own skin. There was no yelling, no trembling, no tears. Just a quiet, icy calm spreading through me, numbing everything it touched. I realized in that instant that pain can be loud, but betrayal, real betrayal, is silent. It's the kind of silence that rearranges you. I watched them for a fraction of a second longer, long enough to memorize the scene with sickening clarity. The steam from the coffee machine, his hand brushing her thigh, her giggle, light, practiced, and utterly unapologetic. That was the moment something inside me snapped, not violently, but cleanly, like a thread pulled from a sweater. I took one step back, then another, until I was out of their line of sight. And without saying a single word, I walked out of my own house, each step feeling like the first chapter of a story I never wanted to write. I don't even remember unlocking my car. My hands were shaking, but my mind felt strangely clear, almost too clear, like shock was tidying up my thoughts one by one. I sat in the driver's seat gripping the wheel as the reality settled over me, heavy, suffocating, impossible to swallow. It felt like someone had reached inside my chest and rearranged the pieces without asking. I wasn't crying yet. I wasn't angry yet. I was just suspended, caught between disbelief and a truth I could no longer unsee. As I pulled out of the driveway, the house disappeared in the rearview mirror, but the image in the kitchen burned behind my eyes like a brand. I kept replaying every detail, trying to make sense of something that made no sense at all. How long had it been happening? How many Thursdays had I unknowingly handed over to him on a silver platter? The humiliation mixed with something deeper, something colder. I felt it rising slowly inside me, a kind of resolve that tasted metallic, like the moment before a storm breaks. I don't know what guided me to Margaret's house. Instinct, anger, maybe some subconscious need for truth, but my hands seemed to turn the wheel on their own. Because suddenly, I wasn't thinking about Eric or that woman on my counter anymore. I was thinking about Margaret's tea, her clock watching, her nervous hands, her too sweet smile. And as I drove closer to her home, I felt the sickening possibility forming in the back of my mind. What if those Thursdays weren't kindness, but choreography? By the time I pulled up in front of Margaret's house, my entire body felt like it was vibrating. Not from fear. Fear would have been easier. This was something sharper, something that lived between fury and heartbreak. I slammed the car door harder than I meant to, and climbed the steps with a kind of determination I didn't recognize in myself. Before I could think twice, I banged on her door, each hit echoing through my bones. When she opened it, her face softened in that familiar, polite way, and that alone nearly made me break. "Amy, darling, you look pale. What happened?" she asked, voice dripping with manufactured concern. The question hit me like a slap, because in that moment, standing on her porch, I knew she wasn't surprised to see me. Her eyes flicked over my face quickly, too quickly, almost assessing the damage before deciding on the correct expression. I felt my throat tighten, heat gathering behind my eyes, but I refused to let myself fall apart. Not in front of her. Not when the truth was crawling straight into the open. "Your son is cheating on me," I said, my voice shaking even though I tried to steady it. "Right now, in our kitchen." She blinked, just once, and something in her expression barely shifted. So small anyone else would have missed it. But I didn't. I was studying her like my life depended on it, watching every flicker of emotion. Instead of horror or shock, there was this tiny, fleeting tightening around her mouth, a momentary freeze, and that microsecond told me more than any confession ever could. When I said she didn't look surprised, Margaret's reaction was instant, but not in the way you'd expect from a mother hearing her son was caught cheating. She straightened her shoulders just a little too fast, almost like she'd rehearsed the movement. "Oh, dear, that's terrible," she murmured, her voice flat around the edges. Not shaky, not confused, just controlled. And that control felt sinister in a way I hadn't let myself consider until that moment. A chill slid down my spine, settling low in my stomach. I stared at her, searching her eyes for something real: guilt, regret, shock, anything human. But all I saw was calculation, a kind of mental shuffling, like she was rearranging her script to fit the situation I'd brought to her doorstep. "You're not surprised," I said, my voice dropping, cracking under the weight of the truth forming inside me. Her eyes widened, but again, too quickly, too perfectly, like a reflex instead of a reaction. "Of course I am," she snapped back, almost offended. And that was when I knew she was lying. It felt like my heart split in two, not from Eric this time, but from the woman who had smiled at me over tea for weeks. "Were the Thursday visits a distraction?" I asked, barely breathing. "So he'd have the house alone?" For a fleeting second, shorter than the blink of an eye, her face tightened. Just a small twitch, a crack in the mask she had been wearing. But I saw it. I caught it. And once you see a truth like that, you can't unsee it. Standing there, I felt something inside me break free, like I was finally stepping out of a fog I never knew I was trapped in. When she whispered, "Amy, you're upset. Let's talk." Something inside me snapped, not violently, but with a clarity so sharp it almost felt like relief. I held up my hand, stopping her cold, because I couldn't bear to hear another word from her carefully curated mouth. "Don't say another word." My voice didn't sound like mine. It was steadier, colder, older, and for the first time Margaret seemed genuinely shaken. Not by my pain, but by the fact that I'd finally seen her without the mask. I stepped back from her doorway, feeling the weight of every Thursday pressing into my chest. Those warm cups of tea, those soft stories, those gentle questions. They all rearranged themselves in my memory, revealing a pattern I had been too trusting to notice. The clock watching, the insistence. The sudden kindness. It wasn't affection, it was coordination, it was choreography. And Margaret wasn't a clueless bystander. She was part of the act, woven into the betrayal like a quiet, poisonous thread. The realization made my skin crawl. As I walked away from her house, the night air felt colder, sharper, almost sentient against my skin. Each step was heavy, but also strangely empowering, like I was carrying the truth with me instead of letting it choke me. Behind me, I heard her call my name. Once, then again, but I didn't turn back. I couldn't. Because the woman who pretended to welcome me into her home had also welcomed betrayal into mine. And as I reached my car, trembling, breath uneven, I realized this wasn't just about what Eric had done. It was about what they had done together, and what I was going to do next. On the drive home, something inside me shifted from shock to strategy. It was subtle at first, like the faint tightening of a muscle you didn't know you had. But with every mile, that feeling grew. I wasn't thinking about screaming or begging for answers. I wasn't thinking about Eric or the woman on my counter. I was thinking about proof, evidence, leverage, because if they had been orchestrating my humiliation behind closed doors, I would expose them in the brightest light possible, quietly, methodically, on my terms. The first thing I did was stop answering Eric's calls. The phone buzzed nonstop. Messages, missed calls, pathetic attempts at damage control. But I ignored all of it. Finally, I sent one text. Just one. I know everything. Watching those 3 words leave my phone felt like releasing a held breath I didn't know I'd been keeping for years. I imagined him reading it, imagined his face draining of color, imagined panic blooming in his chest. And for the first time that night, I felt a flicker of control return to me. I drove straight to the lawyer's office the next morning, running on adrenaline and whatever courage betrayal squeezes out of you. When I showed him the security footage, the woman in my kitchen, half naked, comfortable in my space, his face hardened. Then I showed him the messages from Margaret, the ones pushing those Thursday visits like she was arranging a weekly delivery. And as he connected the dots, his expression softened with something like pity, then sharpened with resolve. "Amy," he said, leaning forward, "what they did to you wasn't an accident. It was manipulation. Sabotage. You're going to win everything." And for the first time since stepping into that kitchen, I believed it. When the lawyer asked if I had more evidence, I almost laughed, because yes, I did. I had years of screenshots, messages, receipts, and a timeline that practically glued itself together now that I knew where to look. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who needed these things, but somewhere deep down, maybe I always sensed that trust alone wasn't enough with Eric, or his mother. Laying it all out on the lawyer's desk felt like shedding a second skin, one made of excuses and denial. And underneath it all, there was nothing left but truth. But the part that hit the hardest was realizing how easily they had played me. All those Thursdays, those bonding moments, those cups of tea, they were cover. Distractions, smokescreens crafted by 2 people who smiled to my face while opening the door for another woman behind my back. The betrayal didn't just sting, it carved something new in me, a sharper version of myself, a version who refused to let humiliation be the final chapter. I didn't want revenge that was loud or chaotic. I wanted precision. I wanted consequences that tasted like their own medicine. That's when I decided to reach out to the woman from my kitchen, Lena. I didn't call her to scream or throw flames. I called because I wanted the truth from someone with no mask to hide behind. She sounded startled when she picked up, her voice small but steady. "Amy, I didn't think you'd want to talk to me." I told her I wasn't angry, not at her. I just needed the story straight, without Eric's lies or Margaret's manipulation. And when she agreed to meet, I felt the ground underneath me begin to solidify, piece by piece, as if the universe was finally shifting back into my hands. Meeting Lena was surreal in a way I can't fully describe. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, both of us holding cups we barely touched. She looked nervous, almost guilty, twisting her fingers like she wished she could rewind her choices. When I asked her how it all started, she hesitated for a moment. Then she told me everything. Eric had told her I worked late on Thursdays, that our marriage was distant, that I didn't pay attention to him. Lies he used like tools, shaping a story where he was the victim and I was the villain. Hearing it stung, but clarity has its own kind of power. What hit even harder was when she mentioned Margaret. "His mom said Thursdays were perfect," Lena whispered, her eyes darting around as if someone might be listening. "She said you were always out, that he deserved some happiness." My stomach tightened, heat rising up my chest like a slow-burning flame. So it wasn't just Eric bending the truth. His mother was giving him permission, encouraging him, even facilitating moments he could betray me without consequence. I felt something cold settle in my bones. Not sadness, not anger, but certainty. Lena looked at me, eyes glossy with guilt, and said she'd testify if I needed her to. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't about her, not anymore. She was just another pawn in a game Margaret and Eric thought they controlled. But I wasn't a pawn, I wasn't fragile, and I sure as hell wasn't done. As I walked out of the cafe, the pieces of my plan started clicking into place with a precision that felt almost mechanical. They had built their betrayal brick by brick, week by week. And now it was my turn to build something of my own, something they would never see coming. Walking back into that house felt like stepping into a crime scene where I was both the victim and the detective. Every corner, every shadow, Every familiar piece of furniture looked different, tainted. And there they were, Eric and Margaret, standing in the living room like two actors waiting for the curtain to rise. He looked panicked, pale, already unraveling. She looked tense, jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might crack. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. They just stared at me, as if the silence might erase what they'd done. "Amy, please, we can talk." Eric started, taking a step toward me. His voice was shaky, desperate, the kind of tone a man uses when he realizes the life he took for granted is slipping through his fingers. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. "Talk?" I said, almost laughing. "Like you did with her in my kitchen?" The words left my mouth with a coldness that even surprised me. I watched his shoulders collapse, guilt finally hitting him like a tidal wave. He opened his mouth again, but the only thing that came out was a choked breath. Then Margaret stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly in front of her like she was auditioning for sainthood. "Amy, we're family," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. The irony nearly knocked the air out of me. Family. The same woman who scheduled my humiliation with the efficiency of a personal assistant. I felt something inside me harden, like steel settling into place. "Family?" I repeated, shaking my head. "You set me up." And for the first time since I'd met her, Margaret didn't have a rehearsed smile to hide behind. I reached into my bag and pulled out the divorce papers, placing them on the coffee table with a calmness that felt almost unreal. Eric's eyes widened as if I'd dropped a bomb between us, which in a way I had. "Divorce?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "You can't be serious." I tilted my head, studying him like a stranger. "You lost the right to talk about seriousness the moment your mother helped you schedule your cheating." The words hung in the air, sharp and unforgiving, slicing through the last illusion of the marriage we once had. Margaret's face twisted, fear giving way to anger. "You're overreacting," she snapped, stepping closer like she could intimidate me back into silence. But something in me had broken free. The quieter parts, the gentler parts, the parts that used to shrink when someone raised their voice. Those were gone. "Overreacting?" I repeated softly. "You orchestrated my Thursdays like you were running a calendar for adultery." Her lips parted, but no words came out. And for once, the woman who always had something to say had nothing. I turned to her fully, locking eyes with a steadiness I didn't know I possessed. "And you," I said, voice low but controlled, "are no longer part of my life. Ever." The sentence hit her harder than I expected. Her shoulders tensed, her chin trembled for a single heartbeat before she forced it still. Eric looked between us, desperate, helpless, like a child caught between two collapsing walls. But I didn't feel pity. Not anymore. Because the truth was simple. They thought they were the puppeteers, pulling strings behind my back, and now they were finally facing the fallout of their own choreography. I took a slow breath, letting the moment settle before delivering the final strike. "I already moved my money," I said, my voice steady, transferred the house title, froze the joint accounts. Eric's face drained of color, and I watched panic ripple through him like a shockwave. Margaret opened her mouth to protest, but I didn't give her the chance. "And my lawyer will contact you both." The room fell into a suffocating silence, the kind that reveals everything people try to hide. Eric collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. The man who once acted invincible was shaking, reduced to someone who finally understood the consequences of his choices. Margaret, on the other hand, stood rigid, speechless, furious, trapped in the ruins of the plan she thought she controlled. She looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and something dangerously close to fear. And strangely, that was the moment I felt the first real breath of peace in days. Not joy, not triumph, just peace, like a weight had finally lifted. I picked up my bag, turning toward the door as they both stared at me like the aftermath of a storm they never prepared for. My steps were light, deliberate, grounded. At the doorway, I paused just long enough to let the truth settle between us, an ending they created, and a freedom I claimed. Then I walked out of that house, not as the woman they underestimated, not as the wife they betrayed, but as someone rebuilt by the very rubble they left behind. And as the door closed behind me, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Their betrayal was their downfall. And my beginning.